The first sound Miriam Hale heard when she came back to Gablemarsh was the bell. 1, then 2, then 3 dull tolls, rolling over the flats like a slow animal turning in sleep. It shouldn't have been possible. The church that bell belonged to had been swallowed by the sea a century ago, its spire a black tooth under green water and silt. But the bell rang anyway, traveling through fog and gull cry, striking the little bones of the town the way grief strikes bone, familiar and without hurry. Miriam stood by the rail at the edge of the quay, suitcase at her calf, hair salted with mist. She'd left this town at 19, swearing never to swallow brine again. Yet here she was, 32, a photojournalist with a camera that had known wars and weddings. Back because a letter with no return address had arrived at her London flat. Inside, a Polaroid of the marsh at low tide. 3 figures in the distance. One of them was unmistakably her mother, Eliza Hale, though Eliza had been dead 5 years. On the back, in a compressed, almost schoolchild hand, "Come before the neap. The bells call names when the water falls." Gablemarsh looked the same and older all at once. A bow-legged town. Crooked lane, fish sheds with their tar-black shingles, a pub called the Drowned Man with chalkboards that announced chowder and forecasts. The lighthouse, white once, now a peel of gray, leaned into fog like a tired man. The marsh breathed its slow, tidal breath. People moved the way they always had, stooped and capable, eyes accustomed to measuring weather at a glance. "Miss Hale," said a voice behind her, a tobacco-scraped rasp. "Back then, or back now? Either way." She turned. Silas Penn, keeper of the lighthouse until the authority replaced the lens with LEDs, keeper of everything else since. His beard was a map of winters. He wore the smell of old rope like a cologne. "Hello, Silas." "Your mother had a way of making it look like she'd stepped out for milk," he said, searching her with a tenderness he hid behind mockery. "You have the same look." Miriam let herself smile, small. "I had a letter." With her in it." She offered the Polaroid and watched Silas not take it. He didn't need to see. The marsh kept better records than paper. "Neops in 3 days," he said instead. "You hear the bell?" "I heard." He nodded once, as if she had passed a test he hadn't said aloud. "Then you'll be wanting the old quarry cottage. Keys where she left 'em." "Where is everyone?" she asked, because the quay, for all its crates and nets, felt underattended. "The dawn boats?" Silas squinted into the fog. "Out on the list. The flats have new teeth. Come high water, they'll look like nothing again." "And the bell?" He tilted his head. "Best not ask a thing you already know. Low tides, when the marsh remembers the names we put in it. Come back before dark. The first night always makes fools of the sensible." A gull arrowed low, insolent. The bell tolled again, softer, as if embarrassed to be caught. Miriam gathered her suitcase, and with Silas's nod like a benediction, walked the lane toward the cottage, where she had grown, and which she had grown out of, like a shell. Gablemarsh watched her go, with the blank attention of a cat. The cottage door still stuck between seasons. Miriam braced her hip and shouldered it open. The hinge complained in the dialect of rust. Inside, the rooms held their exact old temperatures. Cool in the parlor, warmer by the stove. Always damp in the little room where Eliza had kept her cutting boards, and jars of herbs, and a row of bottles that had never been labeled. But everyone in town knew their uses. It smelled like nettle tea, salt, and a wood smoke that hadn't burned in years. Her mother's coat still hung on the peg, slate-colored wool. The left pocket would hold a pebble. Miriam reached without thinking and found it, smooth, thumb-shaped. The impulse to call out felt absurd and necessary. "Mom?" The cottage answered with its patient creaks. She set down the suitcase, set up the tripod like an old friend. On the kitchen table, beneath the blue willow plate, lay a second Polaroid she had not left. The marsh at dead low, eelgrass shining like wet hair, the broken spine of the drowned church's roofline. 3 figures again, closer now. Not her mother this time. Not exactly. This figure's posture had Eliza's, the head tipped like listening. Beside her, a child. Behind them, a third, taller one turned away. Second night. Read the back. Bring string. Miriam closed her eyes. The cottage hummed like a throat remembering a song. She had come here as a reporter. Yes, to make a proper piece, to verify a fable. But she had also come here for the most foolish reason of all, to be wrong about death. She spent the day doing loyal things. She walked the lane that ran like a seam through town, letting people see her and be seen. Grace at the post, who still shut letters in with her finger pad. Tom Kettle at the slipway, who patched nets like a rosary. The pub's new boy, Cal, with forearms like coiled rope and a suspicious gentleness when he poured tea for an old woman with hands like gull's feet. She told them all, or let them think, that she was here for an article about coastal erosion, an old station story. They nodded and gave her weather and gossip, which in Gablemarsh were the same things. By 4, fog and dusk were licking the eaves. At 5, the bell rang once from under the water, and the town got that drawn look people get when a winter blows through a door and won't leave. She found Silas at the lighthouse, which lived on a spit of rock like a tooth, wind-hollowed and stubborn. He sat in the doorway, rubbing oil into a length of line, as if it were a violin. He did not ask what she'd found. A man like Silas keeps questions for a different tide. "You said string," she said instead, showing him the second Polaroid. He flicked the edge. "Fine twine for fine knots." There's a trick to marsh work and to calling things back. What things? Things that looked at you too long and forgot their own names, he said. And in the saying, she heard not warning, but kinship. "Take this." He handed her a spool of tarred line. "Tie as you go. Count your crossings. Don't look back at a bell's third. Don't step where the grass looks like hair." He stood then, slow and iron in the knees, and his hand landed on her shoulder like ballast. "Miriam Hale," he said, and saying her name seemed to bring weather. "If you see her, remember, a marsh borrows faces. It likes to give you exactly what you can't afford to keep. Then why go at all?" He smiled, and it looked like the sun through bottled beer. "Because we're the kind of people who'd rather drown than wonder. Low tide in Gablemarsh is a clock set by a moon that doesn't care for human appointments." Miriam walked out on flats that gleamed like a skinned thing, boots sinking 1/2 inch, then letting her go. The wind had the taste of iron. The eelgrass lay in lazy script, everything writing the same letter over and over until it made a language only birds could read. She tied knots as Silas told her, left over right, right over left, every 10 paces, the tarred line trailing behind her a black scribble. She counted crossings, where the old streamlets carved the flats into rib and spine, where mud changed to sand, where the first black stones of the drowned cemetery's wall broke the surface like vertebrae. At the third crossing, she heard it. A breath, not wind, not wave, not anything that cares if you're brave. A breath, like a room inhaling. The sea takes air in a way people mistake for silence. She had told herself she wouldn't look at the church, but not looking at a thing doesn't make it gone. The roofline was there, as the Polaroid swore, a bent ridge like a knuckle. The bell hung somewhere below, and every so often found its old voice. When it did, the eelgrass leaned toward it. Eliza Hale had lit candles for the dead at this place when the water was low enough to trick you into believing in return. She had said the names of old fishermen, drowned babies, a girl who'd gone out on the marsh to meet a boy and never came back. She'd said Miriam's father's name, a man who ran for longer than the tide and therefore never returned at all. Miriam's foot found something shaped. She reached, thinking stone, and pulled up a shard of green glass, beveled on one edge, the corner of a window, the church's eye. She pocketed it, and the role of thief, once performed, will beg an encore. The third toll came low and deliberate. It walked the flats. She did not look back. She had Silas's voice in her head like a low light. Don't look at a bell's third. Still, something in her turned. Something always does. When she lifted her face, 3 figures stood on the church's stone threshold. One tall, turned away, coat flapping. One smaller, a girl whose hair drifted like weed. And in the middle, a woman with Eliza's particular defiant slouch, hip a little out, chin a little up, eyes daring you to say what you've come to say. Miriam's mouth opened on a word that made no sound. Her mother raised a hand. It was a small hand, always, good for cutting twine and plucking bone from fish. Eliza touched her forehead, her lips, her heart, the old county sign for still here. Miriam took a step. The marsh opened a mouth. No poet ever taught her to translate what happened next. One moment, she stood on flats that felt solid enough to build a house upon. The next, her left boot was sucked to the ankle, cold, rising like the hand of an old debt. She jerked backward, but suction is a logic older than panic. Tarline bit her palm. She wrapped it, heaved, felt tendons complain the way ropes do when you ask an old boat to muscle the sea. The mud released with a fart like a vulgar laugh. She fell, rolled, came up spattered and shaking, and furious at how small she was. On the threshold, Eliza did not move. When Miriam regained her breath, the third figure turned its head. It was not a head. It was a trick of mist and want, a taller shape, a negative, an absence that made a shape the way a drowning makes a woman. Don't, Miriam said aloud, to the figure, to herself, to the bell. She could not tell. By slow inches she regained ground, knots counting her back up the page. She walked until the eelgrass changed its grammar, until black stones gave way to silt's unbroken face. By the time she stood on hard sand, the church's roof was a low thought, and the bell had forgotten her name again. She did not cry. People raised by Eliza Hale learned early that tears invite wind. She washed her hands in a rivulet and walked home via the Lane of Terrors. Brave, foolish people keep such lanes to remind themselves what freight they are. At the cottage, under the willow plate, a third Polaroid waited, edges still damp, as if the marsh had shaken itself and thrown this up like a blessing or a bait. This time the image was closer. Her mother's face was clear enough for a fight. The child's hand held hers. The tall thing's shadow lay across their feet. On the back, third night. Bring something of hers. Bring something of yours. Tie them. Listen hard. Miriam sat on the floor and put her head against the cabinet to feel the house's heart beating. It did. Houses that hold women's lives learn that rhythm. Fine, she said to no one she could see. Have it your way. By morning, the town had a notion of her nights. The pub watched her cross to the quay with its ale-mild eyes. A boy on a bike, the butcher's lad, shadowed her for a block and then bolted when she turned. At the post, Grace slid a bundle across the counter with the neutrality of a midwife. Eliza left this for you, she said, though the parcel had the makeup of a thing that had waited in the dark so long it might as well have been waiting for anyone who'd ask. Inside, Eliza's field ledger, waterproofed with wax, bound with blue cord. On the first page, a sketch of the marsh, like a map a fox might draw if it had good hands. Lines for water paths, circles for sinkholes. The church, a square with an X, like a letter that had lost its envelope. Margins full of tiny notes that smelled of nettle tea. Do not call a name when the eelgrass lies north. If the bell sounds also in the parcel, a piece of Eliza's red scarf, frayed at one end, smelling faintly of wood smoke, and the lemon-salty soap she used in unrepentant amounts. Miriam held it to her face until color went bright behind her lids. The day went gray with purpose. She fixed tea. She filled thermos. She tested the tarred line with her heel. She spoke to Silas without saying a word, and he answered by leaving a small coil of proper rope on her doorstep, like a benediction. At dusk she pocketed her father's brass compass, the only thing of his she'd kept, a useless bauble whose needle sulked always toward where he had not gone, and the green glass she'd stolen from the church's eye. Around her wrist she tied Eliza's red scarf. Around the scarf she tied a strand of her own hair, cut as her mother had cut hair for luck. She felt foolish and correct. The flats at Third Low were a different country. Fewer birds, more breath in the mud. The eelgrass lay south, so the ledger said it meant nothing good or bad, only attention. She counted knots as before, but this time she spoke under her breath, the names Eliza had taught her to say into wind. For the drowned, for the lost, for the ones we loved who kept walking. At the cemetery wall, she paused. Half the stones were bodies now. The marsh sets its own headstones. She put her palm to the wet lichen, and the rock felt hot, as if the earth had fever under all that water. The bell did not ring. The silence had the feel of a room where someone has just left. Come on then, she said, ashamed of the tremor, if you mean to have me. She reached the church's threshold. Water lay in it like glass, thin as a lie. Beneath, the dark, belied shape. In the well of the west wall, a crab turned a claw over and over like a sentence. "Mother," Miriam said, and the name left her mouth like a weather system. Eliza stepped into the open. Not a trick of angle, not fog, not wish. Eliza with the hair she despised for its streaks, with the mouth she made when a fishbone went wrong, with the coat that had been mended at the left cuff so many times it remembered every winter. She looked thinner and kind in the way the dead become kind, the edges sanded by a tide the living can't bear to watch. "Miri," she said, and the bell inside Miriam rang in answer. "Hush now." The child at Eliza's side lifted her face. Miriam knew that face in a way that made her knees unreliable. It was Miriam at 8, gap-toothed, salt-chapped, eyes too large for a day. The tall thing, behind them, angled its head like a gull watching knives. Eliza nodded at the rope at Miriam's wrist. "You brought it then?" "I brought it." She could not feel her hands. "Is it really you?" "For our purposes," Eliza said dryly, "which is how a woman tells you the truth without inviting your worst questions. Give me the end. Tie it to the rail." Miriam fetched the loop over the remnant of a pew end and made a proper cleat hitch, the way Eliza had made her learn, her fingers grateful for tasks that left no room for crying. Eliza tied the other end around her own wrist, with a strength that suggested this was not the first time she'd done so. "Now listen." Eliza's voice had the authority of a barometer. "The marsh may let me go. It may not. If it does, you'll feel the pull. You must not look behind you. You must keep your feet on the words of the eelgrass and count your crossings. If we get as far as the boundary stones, we will be obliged to pay. We will pay by name. Are you prepared?" Miriam nodded, in the way a child nods when the argument is useless. "What will it take?" she asked, "because debt looks better when you can amortize it." "What it always takes," Eliza said. "What it thinks you owe." The shadow behind them leaned. Miriam saw it properly then. Not a man, not a woman, not a thing the world had a name for. It was an outline of missing, a cut-out silhouette of everyone she'd ever wanted returned. It was her father's broad shoulder, one second, her grandmother's bun the next, her own cat as a girl the next, and there in that malevolent generosity was the trick. If it could show you exactly what hurt, it could keep you looking, and looking drowns people just as efficiently as water. "Don't you look at it," Eliza said sharply, catching the angle of her daughter's head. "It's older than the bell, and it does not love us." "What is it?" Eliza's mouth thinned. "A ledger. The marsh keeps one." The rope went slack. It went taut. It went slack again. Miriam realized she had been holding her breath the way you hold breath when a midwife tells you when to push. "Now," Eliza said, and stepped up out of the threshold. Like a woman stepping over a sill, the rope bit Miriam's wrist. She walked backward, counting. The eelgrass curled under her boot like script. She kept her eyes on the knot, on the flat, on the small good work of surviving. Behind her, the rope gave exactly the amount of faith a rope can give. At the third crossing, the bell rang. Not from the church, but from very low, as if struck by a hand that had to remember handness before doing it. "Don't look," Silas said inside her. Eliza said outside her. Miriam said to herself, She did not. At the cemetery wall, the rope sang, a high note that cut the mind. Eliza breathed like a woman lifting a sofa. The rope went out another inch. It came in 2 inches. Out again. The marsh hissed. Dot. They reached the boundary stones. There, Eliza stopped. Payment, she said, conversational as a woman at a counter. Name it. Miriam's mouth knew its job. Me, she said. Take me. Eliza's laugh was sailor's humor, which is to say, not unkind. You don't offer a shop your house key for a tin of fish. Then what? Your bitterness, Eliza said simply, as if a sugared thing. Let it go. That story you made of me leaving you every time I mended a net. That anger you saved for your father, you spent on the sea. That soft unkindness you hoard like a flask. Miriam's throat went hot. That's not a fair price. You can afford it, Eliza said. The shadow leaned near enough that the air got cold where its face should have been. The child version of Miriam, patient as an eel, lifted a hand and slipped her fingers into Eliza's. I'll give mine too, the child said soft, with the courage that makes adults ashamed. I'll give the part that liked being alone, because then I didn't have to see you go. The marsh considered. The rope eased. Eliza stepped another pace. The shadow leaned harder. Miriam felt a pressure at her back, like a hand wanting to find a door through her ribs. Don't, Eliza hissed at it without turning. Not this one. They reached the last stone. Ready? Eliza said. Miriam nodded, and in the nod, let something loose that had been stuck behind her eyes since she was 8, and first learned a town could swallow anything and call it weather. It rode out of her toward the flats, warm and humiliating and fine. Eliza stepped onto the hard sand of the boundary. The rope slackened. Miriam sagged. Gravity remembered them both. Eliza's hand on her wrist, her mouth on her hair, the body of her mother making the world make sense for one blessed second. A sound like a ledger slamming shut. The shadow came up like a wave that knows your weight. It took the child, Miriam, the part of her that loved secrets more than company, and drew her back across the line with a gentleness that felt like permission, and a force that felt like judgment. Eliza went cold. No, Miriam said, the way a woman says to a tide that will not listen. Payment, said the marsh, not aloud, but in the particular fatigue of the rope. One of you. Eliza looked at Miriam the way she looked at fish, brave enough to kill and sorry enough to do it well. It was always going to be one. Miriam shook her head, and anger made the air around her hot enough to burn off fog. She reached for the rope, for the ledger, for anything a woman can cut. She took the green glass from her pocket, the church's eye, and with it sliced the rope that tied them. The marsh hates surprises the way accountants hate wet receipts. The cut rope snapped like a whip. Eliza stumbled forward, stepped with both feet onto hard sand. The child version of Miriam, already half-claimed, slipped free of the shadow's hand in the confusion and ran, skirts up, to slam into Miriam's legs with the force of a tide ripping back. Child and woman and mother and rope tumbled into a knot of limbs and foolish happiness at the last stone. The shadow made a sound that could have been a bell dropped down a well. The eelgrass lay down flat. Something under the flats sighed, like a debt forgiven, without the debtor's consent. Eliza laughed once. shocked and clean, and then went very still. Miriam felt, with the animal knowledge grief gives you, whether you want it or not, the precise degree to which the marsh would allow a miracle. "You clever bugger," Eliza whispered. The word bugger had all the history of their kitchen in it. Fishbone spit in the sink, the tea left too long, every apology made by boiling water. "Go home now." "What about go home?" Eliza said again. And in the word home was an address Miriam had not used since she drew maps on flour sacks. They walked together to the lane. Eliza's steps left no mark. The child dissolved the way grief sometimes does, slowly enough to notice the shape it leaves behind. By the time Miriam put her hand to the cottage door, Eliza's coat had turned into fog, and the red scarf around Miriam's wrist smelled only of salt. Inside, on the table, under the blue willow plate, a fourth Polaroid waited. Just one figure now, standing at the lighthouse door and knocking. On the back, "Last night. Bring the ledger. Bring light. Don't come alone." News travels through little towns like perfume or smoke. By afternoon, a handful of the old guard had found Miriam and made a committee of themselves, as men do. Silas of the rope and light. Tom Kettle, who had seen a man's head turned by the marsh and turned him back with a slap. Grace from the post, because women who know envelopes know secrets. Cal from the pub, because youth is ballast. And Father Beale with a lantern, because even a man with an argument about God knows when to carry fire. They gathered at the lighthouse, where the wind turned everything to salt. The sky had the bruised look of a night that would want a lesson. Miriam shook out Eliza's ledger on the lighthouse table. The women read the margins like a psalm, mouths moving, fingers finding the bits that mattered. Bring light. Don't come alone. Pay with what you can afford to lose, and nothing else. The men tied knots and tested lamps and spat into the wind. Ritual is just competence with a hymn. "Who's the third figure?" Cal asked, eyes on the Polaroids. He had the particular courage of someone who had not yet lost a person to the marsh, but had imagined it often. "The marsh's accountant," Grace said flatly, which made Father Beale flinch and Silas snort, both excellent responses. "It keeps books." Father Beale made a sign in the air that would have made Eliza laugh dirty. "We'll cross the flats at half-fall," he said, "and stand at the threshold and read the ledger to the ledger. We'll tell it what is owed, and we'll deny it what it wants. We'll use names for good and not as bait." "Don't preach at it," Silas muttered. "Then what?" Cal asked. "Speak to it like weather," Silas said. "Respect and ignore in equal measure." They went at sundown. Each carried two things, a light and a debt they meant to pay. Silas carried his shame at failing once to pull a man free. Grace carried a letter she had opened on a Tuesday out of curiosity and never confessed. Tom carried the memory of a boy he'd mocked before that boy walked into the flats. Father Beale carried doubt, his secret lover, and offered it with both hands. Cal carried his fear of disappointing men like this. Miriam carried the green glass and the red scarf, her father's sulking compass, and the anger she could afford to lose. She hoped the marsh would accept payment from 6 ledgers at once. The flats took them one by one, like a wedding aisle too long. Their lights burned constant. At the threshold, the church opened like a jaw. The bell, tired of being coaxed, said nothing. Miriam stepped first, thinking of Eliza's hand, The others formed a ragged half-circle behind her. The posture prayer often takes when people wish not to call it that. "Ledger," Grace said, and her voice carried like a bittern's. "We've come with ours, show yours." From the water, bubbles like punctuation. From the dark, movement like accounting. The shadow rose taller now, a column of missing with a head that learned faces to taunt you with. It wore a priest's silhouette one second, a girl's the next, a dog's the next, and in every shifting was a kindness that stank. "We don't bargain with fancies," Silas said, light steady, rope in his left hand the way a man holds a friend up under the arm. "We ask in the old way. We pay what is ours. You don't take more." The shadow tilted its invisible face. The flats under Miriam's boots went soft as a promise. She shifted, felt Tom's shoulder at her back like a doorstop. Father Beale opened his lantern, and the light inside poured out like truth. "All things return," he said simply. "We don't say how, but some we call back for love." The shape shivered, the way a ledger shivers when a number changes columns. The bell struck once, then twice, not under the water, but behind their ribs. Eliza Hale's laugh echoed in Miriam's ear, like a shell. "Take it," Miriam said suddenly, and before anyone could stop her, she flung her father's compass into the threshold. "Take where he went. I don't need it." The shadow's head tracked the arc. The compass struck black water and vanished. The eelgrass at the door wrote a word Miriam did not know and would remember forever. Silas stepped forward and pulled a hook from his pocket, one he had sharpened the day a boy died and never used since. "Take what I didn't fix then," he said. "I can't keep paying its weight." Grace unfolded the letter she'd opened, the ink long faded. "Take my nosy hands," she said with a grin that saved her. "Or at least what they did. I've had enough of it." Tom Kettle, incapable of poetry, put his left fist into the water and let it sit until it hurt like childhood. "Take a bit of me that said the word that sent him out," he said. "Keep it. I don't want it." Cal, who thought himself nothing to give, bent and took from his pocket a small tin soldier. "My brother's," he said quietly. "I kept it when I shouldn't." He let it go. The soldier stood a second upright on the water, as if at attention, then tipped and sank. Father Beale, who had worn faith like a rock, said nothing. He simply unclenched the hand where doubt had been a jewel, and let the marsh do with it what it pleased. The shadow drank it all, like a book drinking ink. The flats grew harder under their boots. The church's door, if door it could be called, thinned. "Return," Grace said, and the words struck the marsh like a spoon on glass. "Return what you owe." The bell tolled thrice. Not far, not under, but right there, and with it, riding the sound like a fish rides wake, came Eliza Hale, coat open, hair like rope, grin like a storm you love, eyes that made Miriam 18 and 8 and everything again. "Stop crying," Eliza said to all of them, which was unhelpful and exactly right. "Look at you, a committee." Miriam reached, and this time the marsh did not take purchase. Eliza was lighter than air. She weighed exactly her own laugh. "Not long," Eliza warned. "A place like this doesn't give change. It'll take it out in other coin." "Then come," Miriam whispered. The 6 turned and walked back. The shadow did not follow. At the cemetery wall, Eliza paused. "What?" Miriam asked. Eliza cocked her head. "I can hear it." She smiled with her mouth and eyes, and the gap in her left incisor. The bell. It's not the church at all. It's you lot. It's your little bones when you insist on living. They reached the boundary stone. Eliza's feet touched ordinary earth, the kind that loves potatoes. Her form blurred at the edges like a gull in fog. She gripped Miriam's sleeve. "Miri," she leaned close. "I left you badly. I went quiet instead of soft. I didn't teach you how to let a thing be unfinished." Miriam laughed once, the sound like a cork pulled. "We were poor," she said simply. "We were," Eliza agreed, "but that was no excuse." She cupped Miriam's face. "Don't wait for a tide to give you permission." Behind them, the church's shadow shuddered with a patience that meant, "We will meet again." Ahead, the town's low lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Eliza kissed Miriam's forehead. It felt like weather. Then she was gone. Not swallowed, not stolen, not even dissolved. Just ended. The way a note ends when you finally let the air out of your chest. The six stood in the lane, lanterns in their hands like witnesses at a small resurrection. No one spoke. People who have wrestled weather keep silence as a souvenir. In the days that followed, the bell still tolled sometimes at low tide. People still found bittern feathers wedged under doors and photographs tucked into rope coils, showing figures you could argue about. In The Drowned Man, Cal poured an extra inch for those who needed salt in their mouths, to remind them they were bodies and not fog. Miriam cataloged everything with a professional's cool and a daughter's greed. She made photographs of the flats, of the eelgrass's grammar, of the cottage's 2 doors, and of Silas, asleep on a coil of rope like a cat. She wrote what she could and burned what she should. Some towns require their secrets to be salted, not printed. At the post, Grace handed over a final parcel, Eliza's, now truly hers. Inside, the willow plate that had hidden Polaroids, a spool of red thread, and a recipe for nettle soup written in a hand Miriam could not mistake. At the bottom of the parcel, folded so small it felt like a lesson, a note. "Bring no more than you can carry. Bring enough for the stubborn." The night before Miriam left, she walked to the boundary stone alone. Not to call, not to dare, but to listen. The marsh breathed like a sleeping animal. The eelgrass wrote its long poem. The church, undeterred by grace or ledger, waited the way ruined things wait, patient and correct. Miriam knelt and pressed the green glass back into the mud. "Keep your eye," she said. "Watch over your own." When she rose, Silas was a silhouette on the path, a big bird of a man. "You'll go then." "I'll go. Pictures and words, is it?" She smiled. "A few, not enough to make a god angry." He nodded. "A god doesn't notice. A marsh notices." She let the marsh have the last word. It likes that. On her last morning, the bell rang once, clear and almost merry. The tide lay lowest it would for months. The flats showed their ribs. Miriam walked the quay with a camera slung and the easy shoulders of a woman who had carried something heavy and put it down where it belonged. At the inn, a child with hair like wet rope recited the names painted on the wall, the ones of those lost at sea. The child's mother hushed her and handed her a paper boat. People kindnessed one another with fish and battery cables and chairs. Miriam stood by the rail where she had first heard the bell and felt in her coat pocket the red scarf. It smelled of wood smoke still. The compass was gone, which was right. The photograph of 3 figures had curled at the edges and become a thing you keep, not a thing you consult. As the noon boat cast off, Silas raised a hand like a man acknowledging weather he approved of. "Mind the ledgers," he called. "I will. And if you hear bells where bells aren't," he added, eyes crinkled, "write it down before it gets away." "I will," she said again. London took her into its indifferent arms. Buses and strangers and the enviable fact that the sea was far. She wrote an article about coastal rituals and how communities measure loss. She wrote another about the acoustics of drowned spaces and how sound becomes a tide. She did not write about the ledger that keeps names underwater, and sometimes, if you tie the right knot and pay the right coin, lets one come home for a word. Not every country is for maps. On certain low nights, though, when the city longed for storms it would not get, Miriam would hear a bell in the pipes or in the throat of a lift, and she would turn her head, half expecting to see Eliza in a doorway, her mouth crooked, saying, "You're late." And Miriam would smile and say to the empty kitchen, "I'm here now," and count her crossings of rooms, of sentences, of griefs, and light a kettle, and tie a red thread around her wrist for a few minutes. Not for magic, not for ghosts, but because some lessons are just good seamanship. Take what you can carry. Bring enough for the stubborn. Don't look at a bell's third. And when the water fell somewhere far from any shore, and the flats showed their writing hands, the marsh, which is nobody's and keeps its ledgers anyway, would breathe out a name, and the name would be a bell, and the bell would be a house with 2 front doors, and somebody, somewhere, would walk in.